Afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Onward's Great Growth Rally. This is our event on how we can get growth in our cities, and it will not, unlike some other events that you'll go to at Conservative Party conference, focus on tax cuts or anything similar. It will focus on where growth comes from, which is places, which is cities and towns and hamlets and villages and whatever else is in vogue at any particular moment, but individual parts of this country where people, industries and institutions come together in order to create growth. And it's something that's been at the core of Onward's work since we started our programs on levelling up, or more recent ones on science and technology, particularly focusing on the place-based aspects of growth as well. And I'm really pleased that for this discussion, we are joined by a sensational panel. Immediately to my right, we have the Mayor of the West Midlands, Andy Street. To my far left, we have John Stevenson, the MP for Carlisle and Chair of the Key Cities APPG, all-party parliamentary group. To Andy's immediate right, we have Tracy Blackwell, the CEO of the Pension Insurance Corporation, an organisation making really big investments in urban projects and cities projects around growth, green growth and net zero. And then we're delighted today to be working with both core cities and key cities who have very kindly sponsored the event. And so we have two representatives of local governments, two councillors. One we're extremely pleased to have, given we're in her home city, Councillor Bev Craig, the leader of Manchester City Council. And then on my far right, Councillor Jim O'Boyle, the Cabinet Member for Jobs, Regeneration and Climate Change at Coventry City Council. Two cities that really, I think, are at the cutting edge of how you can harness private sector investment to drive growth. What we're going to do today is kick off with a few opening remarks and thoughts on how we can drive growth in the UK, a topical question at the moment. And then we're going to come to questions from the floor. So I'll have plenty of time for all of you to jump in with your thoughts. Please do tweet any remarks that you might hear or any of the discussion. We're using the hashtag CPC23 and a very selfish plug for our water bottles, which you can see in front of you here, and there are lots of at the back. We practice what we preach at Onward, fully sustainable products, and you can take one on your way out. We have quite a lot to shift, so please do take them. Friends and family might enjoy them as a gift. Let's kick off then, Andy, with you. You've done a huge amount in the West Midlands to attract private investment for projects which make a difference to people's lives. What's been the secret to some of that, and what do you think the lessons are?
Okay, thank you very much, Adam. So, a few things to cover here. First of all, you talked about, let's call it the pure part of private investment, so inward investment from overseas. Perhaps given that we are very constrained, that is the obvious place to look. And we recently had inward investment stats, which for the West Midlands and indeed for both Birmingham and Coventry were really exceptionally good. How's that come about? We put our cash into an organisation to drive it. Might not seem the most original thought, but you have to put serious cash. You have to be committed to it, sustain it over years. Jobs born back in 2013, and everywhere had the opportunity to do them. Pretty uniquely, in Birmingham, it was put right in the middle of the city. The consequence there now is we've been able to use the funding model to completely reshape that area of the city centre based around Centenary Square, for those of you who know it. And on the back of that public sector remodelling, we've been able to see very substantial inward investment come from HSBC, from Goldman Sachs, from PwC, from Arup, all around that. But the critical point was it was the public sector that provided the infrastructure and the remodelling to do it. And now we will do the same technique with our investment zone model in Coventry and indeed in other parts of Birmingham, and our levelling up zone model, which was negotiated in our devolution deal. So a critical piece there. And then the third thing I would just put on the table of where we have found really good progress, and this is particularly around the housing regeneration piece, has been the ability to use a small amount of public money for brownfield remediation. That again, the same principle, then the private sector comes in and builds on those locations. The leverage about 10 to 1. So we've been able to make a good case to central government that it is actually an appropriate use of public money then to kickstart private investment in that way. So three things that we think are good examples in your question, Adam, of how does the private sector be encouraged to drive growth in our city regions.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Andy. John, let's come to you next. You kind of see this from the perspective of someone sitting in Westminster and looking at how different cities try and negotiate and advocate for themselves when they arrive there. How do you think about this topic?
Well, thank you. First of all, you've got to recognise the importance of cities and the significance that they have to economic growth. And we all recognise that London, hugely successful, a global city. Bristol is another one that's been very successful, but in many respects, many of our other cities have underperformed. And I think that's the challenge for our country. If you look at Germany and the cities there, it's a much more balanced economy regionally and nationally. So the cities offer, I think, some critical benefits. Tend to have greater skills, critical mass, tend to see innovation, and they also have infrastructure. And again, if I go back to London, I think the arrival of the Elizabeth line has been a huge benefit for London, will continue to drive economic growth there, and I would like to see something replicated like that in the north. So I think it's understanding that cities are a key driver for economic growth. And if I just go back to London again, I think the great thing about London's success in some ways is not London, but it's the impact it's had beyond London in the surrounding area. What I want to see is places like Manchester replicate that. So you see not just Manchester being a successful city, but the areas surrounding it. And if you drill down to the smaller cities, such as my own, Carlisle Carlisle has a responsibility for its area as well. We are far from any other large city, therefore we are the economic driver for the Borderlands growth area. And what you want to see is the appropriate investment that can build that economy locally. And I think Andy's right, one of the other things, infrastructure is vital, but infrastructure is not just about the national strategic projects, it's also about the smaller projects in and around cities. And again, if I go back to my own constituency, we have a new link road, £220 million investment, small beer by national things, but it will open up the city and it will open up West Cumbria. And it's also the smaller infrastructural investments that do matter. But I think probably the most critical thing when it comes to the private sector investing is the environment that they have there, the culture of that locality, the planning abilities to get things done there. Critically, they want to have the skills. I think that's absolutely vital. But probably the most important ingredient, which is political, it is economic, it is business, and it's very simple, it is leadership.
Thank you so much, John. There's a lot to unpack there. Kind of Andy's focus on institutions, on setting the right environment, yours on culture. We'll come back to those in just a moment. Tracy, let's go to you. You think at this a very different perspective, right? As an investor or someone thinking from a financial perspective, commercial perspective. What are some of the things you look for in some of the projects that come to you in cities?
The fact that there are any projects at all to invest in is usually the first start, which is one of the problems. So I run something called Pension Insurance Corporation. We're one of the biggest consolidators of defined benefit pension schemes. We expect about £600 billion to flow into the insurance sector from DB schemes over the next 10 years. And of that amount, we put about 30% into long-term secured assets. So we expect as an industry to invest around £200 billion into long-term infrastructure type investments over the next 10 years. Our huge problem is a lack of things to invest in. We have an insatiable need to invest, and we find it incredibly difficult to find things to invest in. As a result, we've set up something called the Purposeful Finance Commission, and that's working with combined authorities, local government, to look at what the barriers are to investing. Our first report's going to come out fairly soon. The main thing cited by, we did a survey of about 150 local authorities and combined authorities, was that local government lacks the expertise in planning, in particular, to be able to come up with schemes, to have the vision to come up with schemes and to get them off the ground. And we find that's one of the biggest barriers. So planning departments in local authorities have been decimated. For want of a better word, people go to the private sector, and as a result, it takes so much time for projects to get done, they become unviable, and that is one of the biggest barriers. Our survey also said about 90% it's lack of funding and council funding because it's all on such a short-term basis. There's no separate pot for the most part, for long-term regeneration and long-term investment. And 2/3 of authorities are planning on postponing or scaling back their investment plans. And all of this just adds up to a huge lack of things to invest in. Some things do work, and some, when you have very forward-looking authorities, so Andy's West Midlands is really good in terms of thinking forward. West Midlands Manchester has been absolutely brilliant. We've invested a lot in Manchester because there's a lot of forward-thinking visions. But in some of the smaller areas in the country, there just isn't that expertise or vision, and it really does come down to leadership and having that vision to go forward. So we're working as much as we can with local authorities to figure out how to help them, but there is definitely a gap, and that's what we're trying to work on filling.
Fantastic, thank you so much, Tracy. Bev, let's turn to you. What's been the kind of key to some of Manchester's successes, and what opportunities are there to go further?
Thanks, and thanks for having me. Obviously, I've not had far to come, so I suppose it's not been too hard a commute this morning. So I probably have a number of hats here, and I think it's useful to think about where we find ourselves in different cities across the country. Obviously, I'm the leader of Manchester City Council, and I'm the vice chair of Core Cities, the 11 largest cities outside of London. But obviously here in Greater Manchester, Manchester's at the heart of the work we've been doing around devolution. So if I think about where we are in a city like Manchester, it's clear that we haven't got here by accident. I think the point that Andy makes around what your economy looks like and how you talk about your strengths has been really important. And if I think about Manchester's economic strategy, it's focused intentionally on a number of key sectors. So rather than focusing just on one, it's focused on the ecosystem of a range of sectors that we need for our economy to thrive. So we've long-standingly had a plan around life sciences, digital, creative and tech, advanced materials and manufacturing, and financial and professional services. Had we just have gone after one of those sectors, we probably wouldn't now have the largest fintech economy outside of London in Europe, which adds over £5 billion worth of GVA a year into the UK's coffers. So the first I would say is around the coherency of an economic strategy. One that is locally led and locally delivered, that plays strongly to what a place's view of prosperity is, so not just hard economics in terms of GDP and GVA, but also what social prosperity looks like in terms of the well-being of your citizens. But the other component of that is having a nationally complementary strategy that's able to fit into what local areas have. Because if we simply have our own plans and strategies, but with none of the national resource, capacity, expertise, or even the ability to support us at an international stage, then we won't be able to deliver at the pace that we need. The second that I would say is around thinking of not overlooking placemaking. So one of Manchester's successes hasn't been that we've just proactively gone and as we've heard about in the West Midlands, things like the Growth Company, inward investment, or pitch for FDI. Much of that's been framed about the place, the product that you're selling, because people don't just move here to work. The quality of life, the housing affordability and the supply that's constantly coming over the, if I think about Manchester, we've grown by almost 200,000 people in the last 20 years. We've got a pipeline over the next decade that sees another 36,000 homes, 10,000 of which of those are genuinely affordable, because that supply is constantly needed to help a growing city. Don't overlook culture and the role that good living standards have. You're a few metres away from Factory International at Aviva Studios, the largest cultural investment in the UK since the Tate Modern, not just outside of London. So placemaking is really important. But amidst all of that positivity, there are some real challenges that are holding back our cities. And we shouldn't be afraid of saying the word city. I think if we're going to talk about economic growth, if we're going to talk about productivity and prosperity, we can't be in a situation, not just the Prime Minister's words around moving away from the economic geography of cities. It's something that my own party has had a challenge on as well. We can't be afraid of talking about cities as places that drive economic growth and help the surrounding areas do well as a consequence and intentionally. And then just two other areas really quickly. I think the role of the private sector is one that Manchester's always recognised has had a key and important role. If we want to increase the prosperity of our residents, if we want to see Manchester thrive, that needs more money coming into our city. So having a pipeline, a consistent and constant pipeline. So I go across the world and people say, name me a programme or a project that you're excited about. And I'm able to ream off, well, actually, we've got Mayfield, we've got ID Manchester, we've got the work we're doing around Holt Town, we've got Enterprise St John's, which is an expansion of Spinningfield, X, Y, Z, and be able to take that pipeline with you. A few days ago, we released a report as Core Cities, working with the RSA, around unlocking, precisely on this topic, unlocking the economic potential of cities. And with some of the key ingredients and with a pipeline from places, we've estimated that already there is about £100 billion worth of investment a year that could go into cities with the ingredients such as a clear plan and some of the infrastructure levers that we need. And then the final thing I'll say is that obviously there is a lot of asks of multiple agencies and actors when we talk about prosperity and driving up productivity in the country. We've got a good relationship with business. They know that the door is always open. But we also know that business needs certainty. And that's probably, if we think about the economic climate we're in at the moment, viability is a challenge for anyone to go to market, making things stack up without the surety of interest rates over a 10, 20, 30-year period. There are a lot of things that are uncertain for businesses at the moment. So it's really important as local, as regional and as national government, we give certainty when we can. Certainty around infrastructure, certainty around connectivity, certainty around the things that we know that matter, that improve the opportunities and the outcomes for our cities. So I think we can't lose sight of the role of national policy. And I'm trying not to say the word HS2 and having to bash myself back into a box, but it matters. It is something that is vitally important to how we talk about rebalancing our economy and how we talk about creating opportunities that give business surety and give certainty to developments that are already underway.
There we go. Over at 20 minutes on the HS2 bet, you win. OK, let's go to Councillor O'Boyle. Let's hear your thoughts on what your lessons are from Coventry.
Well, I just want to talk a little bit about what is known as the Green Industrial Revolution. And before everyone shouts at me, this is not just about sandals and joss sticks. This is really about opportunities to invest in industry and industries of the future. And we've got them back home in Coventry. Coventry is the location for the UK Battery Industrialisation Centre, the only place anywhere like it, not just anywhere in this country, but actually anywhere in the world. We've got internationally known companies, automotive companies particularly, in the birthplace of the UK automotive industry, by the way, Coventry, investing and producing the battery technology of the future that's going to drive both the automotive sector but lots of parts of our transport industry and also our energy sector as well when it comes to energy storage. And of course Coventry is the location for a potential gigafactory. If we're going to be serious about actually having a powerful economy that understands how we want to support these great world-class businesses, we need to produce and manufacture those batteries here in this country, because if we don't, they'll go abroad. Not just the battery manufacturers, but the automotive manufacturers will follow them very, very quickly. And some of the announcements that were made last week did not give great confidence that we are serious about wanting to invest in these great world-class companies. Coventry is also going to be the first city anywhere in the country that's going to have an all-electric bus fleet by 2025. If we want to decarbonise our transport, if we want to help support improving our air quality, this is a great example of how we use public transport to make that happen. And Coventry is developing a particular new tram system called Coventry Very Light Rail. The vehicle uses automotive lightweighting, which means it's a lot lighter than a traditional tram system. We've also got a track system that it doesn't have to spend millions of pounds digging deep into the ground in cities that then cost millions of pounds to move the utilities. We've got something completely unique and we're looking for investors in all of these. So if we're going to have a successful economy going forward, one of the areas we should not lose sight of, this is not about saying to people you can't use your car, it's about saying to people what are the alternatives and how can we actually help support you to make the right decisions in your future. Hence why finally we've entered into a partnership with E.ON, one of our energy producers in this country, in a part of a strategic energy partnership. We're going to bring forward projects and ideas, investing millions and millions of pounds, up to £2 billion in Coventry alone, on schemes to help decarbonise transport, decarbonise our residential settings, because it's not just about heat pumps, by the way, it's about actually retrofitting and putting in the necessary infrastructure in those homes, such as new windows and doors and all the rest of it, and insulation, because they won't support heat pumps unless you do that. So actually we've got an opportunity to do that. If we don't do it now, we'll miss the boat, and again those sort of industries we will lose abroad, and this is all happening in Coventry.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So we've heard a little bit about the kind of framework that investors need, what's worked in cities and what some of the opportunities are. I want to quickly, I'll take a cheeky first question to you, Andy, on this cities and towns sort of dilemma, right? I think Bev is absolutely right. We need to not be ashamed of saying that there's a real opportunity with our cities and be proud of investing in them. But we've also seen from the government yesterday what I think are some really good announcements about what they're doing in towns. When you, as someone that's responsible for a region that includes, 3 fantastic cities and a range of really successful but also at times struggling towns, how do you think about the balance and the relationship between those places?
So we had this conversation right at the beginning of the local enterprise partnership journey. And there was a unanimity, which I still believe, which is that you have to get your cities, and particularly your city centres, as the places where there is the greatest concentration of good quality jobs. You have to get them thriving. That's what is achieved in comparator cities in France and Germany. And those cities then serve the region around them. Now, that does not mean that towns don't have a complementary role, and of course they do, but they are not going to be the places where you get the same concentration of public transport, ease of jobs being created. So I think the word is complementarity, but I agree wholeheartedly with Bev that we have to concentrate on lifting the performance of our core cities and indeed key cities, and we mustn't lose our nerve over that.
Cracking, thank you. Okay, let's come to some questions from the audience. I'll take them in a group, so I'll take one from the front just there, one from the middle, and then one from the back. If you could just say your name and the organisation you're from. Oh, sorry.
Guardian. A slightly unfair question, probably directed to Andy mainly. We've heard a lot about how for cities to work and for towns to work, you need infrastructure which has to be done at a national level, and you need a consistency. You need to know what's going to take place. I mean, there's been reports today that the decision has been made to scrap the Birmingham to Manchester leg. We don't know if that's the case. But more generally, how difficult is it to get investment in a city and get things working in a city where you just don't know what's going on?
So,
you okay if I take a couple of questions?
Of course, you can do whatever you want. You're in charge, Adam.
There we go. Okay, let's take the other two, just while you're pausing on that.
Pause.
From the middle, thank you.
Paul Swinney from Centre for Cities. Andy, I really like your three things that you set out to answer the question. The thing to summarise then probably would be public sector investment, to de-risk an investment, to then get the private sector in.
Yeah, that's right.
That's the theme. Is that something you feel that central government colleagues properly understand and then able to back you with that?
And then let's take a question from the back there.
Hi, Seb Ellsworth from Access, the Foundation for Social Investment. One of the things that's holding back our big cities is inequality and deprived neighbourhoods within those cities where economic opportunity isn't flowing down to lots of parts of those communities. And that's where social enterprises and trading charities make an enormous economic contribution, a unique economic contribution actually, that private sector businesses find it very hard to do. We've got a great track record actually of investment flowing into those organisations. But I think we really need to widen this debate out from just the role of the private sector and the state to think about the role that civil society plays, not just in social impact terms, but in pure economic terms. They're doing things that other organisations and other businesses simply can't do, and I'd love to hear the panel's reflections on that.
Brilliant. Okay, so we've got three questions there. Peter from The Guardian on HS2, Paul shamelessly plugging Centre for Cities Research at an Onward event, asking about public sector investment, de-risking some of these projects, and Seb on inequality. Andy, let's come to you on those first two questions.
Okay, so we've got to, I don't know, half an hour through the meeting before the question of HS2 is put. So the latest information I have is a statement from number 10 that a decision has not been taken on HS2. You're probably looking at your screen, you will know what that is. But let me just broaden the question a little bit more. You said, is certainty critical? And I will say it is an absolute fundamental point. It's what drives business investment. It's sort of what you've just heard from Tracy. But I will illustrate the answer to the question with a little story because it's more fun than just anything else. We had and I'm with respect to Jim, this is a Birmingham story. I'm sure he'll tell a Coventry story in a minute. But the Birmingham story is around the Commonwealth Games. And obviously it was an incredible success last summer. And lots of commentators said it took 4 years to do. And I used to say, no, it took us 12 years to do because it took us the 8 difference to build the infrastructure stage on which the performances then occurred. Whether it be the station, the public transport, the civic squares, where the bull went, all of the hotel, the whole lot. And credit where it's due, cross-party, the leadership of Birmingham City Council across the political divide has been utterly consistent on its regeneration pieces. And that is what has given the private sector confidence to invest. So the link to HS2 is blindingly obvious. If you tell the international investment community you are going to do something, you bloody well have to stick to your word.
Thank you very much, Andy. Bev, let me come to you on HS2. You kind of briefly mentioned it in your remarks, but it's probably helpful for you to expand. You've seen the recent reports. Where are you at the moment?
So, I suppose in these times, high recent is generally when we look at the internet and everything. So obviously there's currently unconfirmed sources at the minute. I think my position's pretty clear and pretty on record that nobody's spoken to myself or the Mayor of Greater Manchester. We wrote last week on Monday asking for a sensible and grown-up conversation, looking at kind of what could be done pragmatically more than anything else, so not fire and brimstone in our approach. And to date, we've not yet had a conversation with any government minister. I think what it does mean, though, and it's not just certainty for Manchester, it's certainty for this wider point. I've been speaking to colleagues in Liverpool, and they talk about the certainty that they need of high-speed rail getting to Manchester to enable some of the other things that would need to happen to get to Liverpool faster. So this isn't just about one city or one place. This is the consequences of what certainty and communication looks like. And my phone's going wild with businesses, actually, not politicians, businesses that are currently in the city, very anxious and doing all they can to get a bit of certainty. There is at least one project I know that's bringing £3 billion worth of private investment into the city, which was happening and predicated on the basis of high-speed connectivity to King's Cross and what they've seen with the regeneration down there. So I suppose I would just say that these decisions have real-life, long-term consequences. And that point around a long-term vision and plan is very important. It's been the key to Manchester's success and is something that we would echo.
Jim, let me come to you. You're very welcome to chip in on HS2, but I was going to ask you about this second question, actually, about what's the role of the public sector then? You talked about these massive opportunities there are in Coventry, building on the city's industrial heritage and the opportunity and the kind of green industrial revolution opportunity now. What should the public sector be doing and what should it not be doing?
Interestingly, although HS2 doesn't come directly to Coventry, it does bypass Coventry. I cycle around there an awful lot, and you can see the work that is going on, not just south of Coventry, but actually north of Solihull into North Warwickshire. So some work is carrying on, and if that was to then be curtailed, I think would be a real response to how people really feel about our country being too London-centric. I don't know why they didn't start HS2 from the north and going down south. I said it many years ago, but of course the experts knew better than the rest of us, but what little did we know. Leadership is the key point. In local government, difficult as it is with the funding constraints we have to have a decision, we have to lead in it, we have to take difficult decisions, and then we have to hold our nerve and see it through. And that is when you start to get private investors look at you and say, you are a serious person, you're a serious organisation, you're a serious area, serious city, we want to invest in you. The danger is when you're flip-flopping around and you're not deciding where you want to be from one day to the next. And private industry will vote with their feet. And that's why I said earlier on, if we don't invest in battery technology now, the automotive sector and the energy storage sector will go elsewhere, and we will lose a massive opportunity, not just because we want to decarbonise our economy, although that's a very good thing to do, making sure that actually the social benefits and making sure we don't exacerbate climate change and we make sure that our air starts to get a bit cleaner, but it's also about saying to business, we are serious about wanting to work with you. Because at the end of the day, most of us in this room, certainly I was the case until I got elected, I worked in private industry. Most of the people that I represent work in private industry. I don't care whether you're a Labour politician, a Tory politician, or I did meet one once, a Lib Dem politician. Nevertheless, the one thing they all know and have in common is their electorate works for private industry in the main, and we should take them very seriously when they speak passionately about their business and how they want to invest in our country.
Thank you very much, Jim. Tracy, let me come to you then on Paul's question, who I think's had to dash off, so if you want to be mean to him in his absence, please do be. His question about the role of the public sector, because it's an interesting, I think that's where the cities and towns difference comes in, right? Like there's a different thing that an investor might look at that you would need the public sector to do depending on the underlying fundamentals of the place.
Yeah, okay, so what we're looking at as investors, so we have long-term pensions that we need to pay. And let's be clear, this is pensioners' money. So we need to make sure that we are going to get paid back that money now or in the future, over time. So certainty of cash flows, that we are going to get that money is incredibly important. And it is about certainty, it's about predictability, etc. Not all investments show those characteristics. And sometimes there is a market failure and sometimes there isn't. I have to say this government in particular has been very open in terms of understanding, not saying yes or no, but actually understanding what the barriers are to investment in a particular area and what they can do to help, whether it's a regulatory thing that they need to help to unlock it, whether it's money or capital, whatever it is. The last resort for government should be, instead of stepping into where the private sector should be, the last resort should be them coming in to provide certainty, whether it be because there's a long tail of risk, as there is in the nuclear industry, for example. So we've had many years of discussion with government and successive governments over nuclear, and they finally got to the place that the private sector can't bear all of the decommissioning risk and that somebody else needs to take that, and the government's looking at that. But there's just some places where you can, as Andy said, get a 10-to-1 leverage out of making a small investment by the government to get actually a really big effect. And I think there is a place for that, but it shouldn't be the first port of call. All other avenues should be exhausted before you get to the place where the government steps in. But there are some places where it does make sense for the government to step in.
Thank you. And John, let me come to you on this question from Seb about kind of inequality, about how we deal with the fact that one of the big challenges holding back our cities and growth in them is the level of inequality and deprivation we might have. To what degree is that a challenge, and how do we start to tackle it?
Well, can I also just make an observation on the sort of public sector and private sector investment? It is got to be a partnership, and I think the public sector has to recognise what it's good at, but also recognise what it's not good at. And I think that's one of the problems sometimes you do get with the public sector, that starts trying to do things what they should actually leave to the private sector to do. And I often think with the public sector, what we want to be doing is creating the environment so that the private sector wants to invest and can invest, and it's about skills, infrastructure, etc., etc. But yes, we also recognise the challenges of inequality in cities. Cities are very dynamic, but you've also got to be very careful about cities that they do end up having the areas of deprivation, and it's how you ensure that those areas are brought along as well. One of those things is obviously skills in education and making sure that they have opportunity to get employment, and it's making sure that they do have those opportunities for jobs at all levels. But it is a challenge for any city to make sure that it is both dynamic, progressive and investing, whilst at the same time ensuring that their people are not left behind. And I think that is one of the challenges of cities. And just one other thing on cities themselves. We shouldn't apologise for suggesting that cities are actually the economic drivers, because they are. And that's what we've got to make sure that they do have. And I go back to my small little city of Carlisle being the economic driver of the borderlands, but the people in southwest Scotland see Carlisle as their regional capital. And they go there for their shopping, they go there for their entertainment, they go there because that's where the rail infrastructure is. So they want Carlisle to succeed, as they do their own locality. But if you get the cities right, you will tend to get the hinterland right. And I think that's a really important point.
Brilliant. Yep. Thank you, John. Okay, let's take a few more questions. I've got one hand back there, one hand just there, and if there's another one, I'll take it. Otherwise, we'll do those two. Let's do those two. So one back there and then one at the front.
Thanks ever so much. I'm Colette Carroll, and I'm the Managing Director of Transportation for Atkins Realis. And this is going to sound like a plug, but it isn't. It gets to the question. So we've been doing work with the Northern Powerhouse Partnership and Durham University, actually looking at what are the barriers to rebalancing regionally, but also as part of that research, what really came to light was the even greater barriers seen by 16 to 21-year-olds. And for me, impactful investing as a member, as part of the private sector, it's about impactful investing in the skills agenda. So what I'm really interested in, just from the panel, are just some reflections about how you can see the private sector in that sort of skills agenda space, but also what do you think that the public sector can do to help incentivise and enable a real growth in skills across the country and across our cities.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And then the other question was just here.
Thank you. Mark Apsey from Amoresco. We're very excited about our partnership with Bristol City Council, which is known as Bristol City Leap. It's a 20-year deal to bring hundreds of millions of pounds of investment into the city, which was born on great leadership in the city, I think. But as an investor and a business looking to create more jobs, I'd really love to see that replicated across the UK, and I'd be very excited to see more opportunities come to market that we could get involved with. And so I'm interested in the panel's view about how we can do that quickly and really drive the transition to net zero, which we need to do, and lots of places have committed to. Thank you.
Andy, let me come to you on both those questions, because I'm sure you'll have thoughts. One on both the question that came here, but also Tracy's observation that one of the challenges is the number of investable propositions that are coming forward, having the projects that the private sector can understand and engage with. And then this question back here on skills in the private sector and the role that they can play in upskilling young people.
Yeah, so to Claire, first of all, I'm glad this question has come out, because the other driver of cities' fortunes is this. And we've talked about institutional stuff, we've talked about cultural stuff, we've talked about the financial markets, but this is the other driver. And again, let me just again illustrate it with a story. So last year, I was lucky enough to do 2 weeks of trade mission to India in support of the inward investment stats for the West Midlands that I told you about. And every single meeting I had with businesses ranging from whether they be battery manufacturers, as Jim was talking about, to fintech companies, to whatever, they all came to the same point. We're investing in the West Midlands because of the quality of your highest level of skills and the R&D done at the university, and then the quantity of what you might call really good, reliable mid-level skills. And it just stuck right there. We don't have internationally that many real competitive advantages. But the competitive advantages in the quality of our universities is genuine. And so I would just say amen to everything you've said. What can the private sector then do to help drive those skills? I think one thing above all else, be really crystal clear in what you are going to want in 5 years' time. And that's what we've tried to do with these local skills improvement plans. And then there are some examples of where really forward-looking companies have then commissioned individual programs of development, either with a higher education institution or even sometimes with a combined authority providing those programs. But an active clienting is really what I'm saying, but it is mission critical to the future of our cities. Second question about partnerships. I don't actually know the example that you are talking about, but again, the way we've tried to go about this is to form a number of high-level partnerships that the combined authority has entered into, some of which are all around the housing net zero piece that Ian Courts, leader of Solihull Council, who's sitting there, leads for us. So I just again get you to think about this. We have a strategic partnership with L&G. I hope Tracy won't mind me saying, Britain's biggest pension fund. That is £4 billion they've committed to invest in the West Midlands. It's the biggest single regional partnership they've got. Our total cash from the public sector, not what they give to local authorities on an ongoing basis, but through the CA, is £1.5 billion over 5 years. And it just makes you think, if one corporation can triple what that the public sector deal is. So we have a listing of those across various sectors, all aimed at one of our strategic objectives.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andy. Bev, let me come to you, particularly on this question about kind of Bristol, the example there of the opportunities you're able to bring forward. Manchester's got a good track record of kind of being able to package projects. You listed some of them there. How are you able to do that? And to the point earlier on about institutions, how can we help other places do that as well?
So I think there's 2 points in there. The first is how a place does it for themselves, and that speaks to what I suppose some of the earlier discussion was around capacity, vision, some of those key ingredients that you need. The second part of it, though, is and it's something that we spent a lot of time talking about, both through the LGA and core cities, around scale. And we, particularly talking with colleagues in London, with key cities, how can we create propositions with the right regulatory framework that allow a deal that's done in Bristol to be just as applicable with all of that hardwired governance and the heavy lifting that other councils perhaps don't have the capacity to redo and to redo? How do we create that framework that says, okay, well, if it's good enough and passes the governance test for Bristol, how could we then expand that across Manchester, Liverpool, Newham, and places across the country? So we are beginning to do that, particularly with 3CI. I won't go in and talk about that too much now, but a network across the country's major cities around investable propositions that does precisely that around the pipeline. The point in skills is a really important one, because actually touching on where we are in Greater Manchester at the moment, obviously you're down the road from the two most applied to universities in the country, in the University of Manchester and MMU. We've got graduate retention now to just under 55%, which is a very different picture than what it was a number of years ago. But we've also focused on our school age population for the first time in Manchester's history. We're now achieving above, and this isn't something I brag about because it's shameful that this is the first time, but we're achieving above the national average in GCSE, but we're doing it without some of the capacities that support that went into the London Challenge programme. And we're also, through devolution and our Trailblazer, beginning some really exciting work on post-16 opportunities into the technical education. But it's about way of working, and it's around opportunities, and it comes to John's point earlier around pride in place. It doesn't matter if it's a town, it doesn't matter if it's a city, it doesn't matter if it's a village. If there's a vision that people buy into, that the population understand is for them and for their kids, then that's something that will galvanise behind. And what we're doing in Greater Manchester shows that skills is the gateway into that. You might not have those opportunities, but if your kids do, then suddenly getting behind significant growth in a city is something that's much easier to sell.
John, let me come to you.
Yeah, just one key point. In the whole time I've been an MP, 14 years, I've only ever heard one chief executive talk about leadership. And I do actually genuinely think that leadership is absolutely critical. But how do we start to get those leaders to emerge? And I think one thing we haven't discussed yet, although the panel sort of indicates where we should be going, is about devolution and power given to localities and the mayors. And interesting enough, the introduction of mayors, we've seen new leaders emerge, Andy being a prime example, and we've seen those give that leadership to that locality. And I think that is central to some of the things we want to see happen. Yes, something happens in Bristol, the leader there, you want somebody to replicate that in other parts of the country, but you need leadership to do that. You talked about skills. What sort of skills does a particular area need? That's where devolution kicks in. We should be devolving those powers to particular localities because they have a better idea and understanding of what the needs of that community are. I think we're highly centralised in this country. Whitehall make decisions. They haven't a clue what goes on in particular parts of the country, and neither they should. But if they've devolved real power to localities that have an idea of what they want to do, and you've got the leadership at that local level, you can fly. And you're starting to see that in different parts of the country. I just think we need to see it across the country in a far better way.
And why aren't we seeing movement on that, John? Because, I mean, we're at risk of being at violent agreement on devolution on this panel, and there seems to be a lot of agreement more broadly, certainly in public. Why are we not seeing, we've seen some fantastic achievements during this parliament, the creation of new metro mayors, further powers for people like Andy and also Andy Burnham in Manchester, but it's not quite as far as I think many of us would have wanted. Why is that?
I agree, and I think both main political parties are at fault, and I include my own. I think there's a there's a number of things. There's a reluctance on members of parliament, once they become ministers, to give up power. And I think there's a reluctance in civil servants to give up power. And I think if they were to do so, I think they would suddenly discover that actually Whitehall can concentrate on the things that really matter at the national level, and the politicians themselves could concentrate, if you're an MP, at the national level. I actually think we should have dropped the number of MPs from 650 to 600, because I think that would have made bigger constituencies and allowed MPs to concentrate on national issues, while we should be devolving powers down to local areas. And I personally am very enthusiastic about the concept of mayors. But for whatever reason, neither political party wants to embrace this fully. My party's gone some of the way, but I think they've got a long way to go. I'm not sure Labour have even started.
On a day of difficult policy decisions, I think cutting MPs from 650 to 500, 650 to 600 might be particularly tricky. Tracy, this question for you on scale, actually. So the question that Bev talked about, how can we make sure that some of these projects scale, but also about devolution. So, two priors here you've heard from people on the panel. One, investors need there to be kind of scale or the ability to learn lessons between projects, and the other, that local actors give investors confidence. Are those things true?
Oh, yeah, hugely true. And not just from on the investee side, but also on the investor side. Ourselves, Legal & General, our competitors around that have spent the best part of a decade building up the expertise internally to be able to work with local authorities and combined authorities to actually talk about investments, what we can do, how we can work together. So, we've created a virtuous circle now, and I think it's really, seeing what Manchester's done, what Andy's done, you can see the momentum has built, and hopefully that other places in the country that have seen the success in some of these places will then work to replicate it. We still have problems getting into local authorities to talk about how we can work together. There's some who just don't want to talk to the private sector at all. So that really isn't helpful, actually. We have a lot of money to invest. We want to invest. We want to work with local authorities to be able to do it. But if we can't even get in the door because there's just a fundamental disregard for private money, it really doesn't help. So hopefully we're creating this virtuous circle both on the investor and the investee side.
Fantastic. And then, Jim, let me come to you on this question of skills, the question that we had, the first of the two. When you're thinking about this green industrial revolution in Coventry, projects like Very Light Rail, how key are skills to that, and what's the role of the private sector in developing it, or does it have to be a public sector job?
No, it's very important. By the way, there will be less MPs of a particular party after the next election. I can assure you of that, John. Anyway, I wouldn't worry too much about that. But coming back to the thing about skills, is that one example I would give, I mentioned heat pumps earlier on. You talk to the industry, regardless of whether or not anybody wants a heat pump or whether they're in a position to have one, the industry will say they just don't have the skills to actually fit them anyway. And I think making a decision or setting out a policy that then kicks the can down the road actually means those businesses will be even less likely to invest in those skills. On the contrary, giving them more time means they have to then get their cash flow going by actually spending more time and effort on doing their day-to-day activity right now, which means that the new lack of fossil fuel, reducing fossil fuel use of heat pumps, for example, will then be utterly sort of reduced. And that is a real problem. We work with Warwick Manufacturing Group, which is an arm of Warwick University, particularly around Very Light Rail, because as I said, Coventry was the heartbeat, the birthplace of the UK automotive sector. We've got some fantastic R&D, some world-class companies in this area, and if we play our cards right, we can really benefit our economy over the next 20 or 30 years, because as has been said, there are companies overseas who want to invest in this country, in this city, because they can see that we are going to decarbonise quite quickly. But if we keep saying, we'll put it down 5, 10, 15 years, they'll go somewhere else. And with everything, skills mean that if we don't have the skills, we don't have the investment, we lose those opportunities. And it's so vital that we do that. And the last point to make is London black cabs, believe it or not, the black ones that you all know about, they're all made in Coventry. And they're all electric. And they're owned by a company called Geely, who is a Chinese company, who also own Volvo. Let us look wider than ourselves. Let us look across the world. They want to invest in our country, and they are.
Thank you for that, Jim, and your bold prediction about the collapse of the SNP. That's appreciated. Bev, let's come to you for a last word.
So just a really important point, actually, on the skills point. One of the things I meant to mention, we're probably at the territory of some of the lowest levels of private sector investment into skills. So if we want to talk about private sector growth in cities, we also need to have a conversation about the private sector investing in skills in terms of that 5 and 10 years vision.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Bev. We are out of time. So 3 quick thank yous. One, a massive thank you to core cities and key cities. We've partnered with them now for a number of years, and it's fantastic to have the opportunity to talk about cities and cities growth on an Onward stage. Thank you to all of you for coming along and for your questions. And finally, a massive thank you to my panel, to John, to Bev, to Andy, to Tracy, and to Jim. Please give them a round of applause.